So Melissa, the way that I work now, what I thought I'd do is just start with a really brief sketch of like somebody who I've worked with for the last 4 months, who I think is a nice kind of encapsulation of how I work now, and then use that as like, okay, here's what has happened to me over the last, here's what it looks like, over the last 20 years. And then we can kind of unpack that a little bit in all these different ways that you all mentioned. So Claudia, she came in May of this year, and she had lifelong headaches. In early 22, she moved to Long Island and was bit by a tick about a month after that. She was treated with 30 days antibiotics and herbs after being diagnosed with Lyme. But then I saw her a year later. She was referred to me by her sister. And she had a lot of remaining symptoms, kind of roller coaster fatigue, where only 1 or 2 days a week she'd have good energy, which she labeled as kind of 8 out of 10, and then the other days of the week it's kind of middling, and quite often she was like 1 out of 10, kind of barely functioning. I mean, she's still running her own business, she's a physical trainer, she's in good shape, but she's feeling pretty awful. And so I worked with her for once a month for 3 months, because generally I work with people about once a month. And over those first 3 months, her symptoms completely abated. And the first thing we worked with, which I call the priority, there's 2 words that really kind of define my practice right now, flow and priority. And we'll talk about like how that, more of the details of that if we want to, but essentially the priority for her the first time, through this intuitive bioresonance process that I do, was really systems coordination. Okay, there are all these different parts of your body that are working fine on their own, but they're not talking to each other. They're jamming against each other and not working. And so no matter what you do, whether it's diet or exercise or take this supplement, like if those systems aren't working together, then if they're not flowing together, then that's the priority. That's where we start. And so we did that. The second 3 or 4 weeks later, after she got a support plan of some herbs that are these kind of specialized custom tinctures that I use, we worked with brain support. And through my process, I could see that the left side of her brain was just like more sluggish than the right side. And then that was even corroborated when I asked her on Zoom to like stand up and do this pinky nose test that I used to do in my office, and she could do it with her right hand, but I just said that wrong. It was, let's say it was a left side brain, so it was the right hand that she completely missed her nose, the left hand was accurate. So that gave her some kind of buy-in, like, okay, this information is quote, real. And then the third time was, which gets to this question of what functional medicine and what is functional medicine and does functional medicine go far enough? The neurology piece that I did the second time and the first, really, systems coordination, working with the brain, that's functional medicine. How do all the systems work together? The part that fell short for me when I was doing it was, what about emotions? Functional medicine courses that are really elaborate, tons of algorithms, like unbelievable detail about how the body works. It's totally fascinating. And there's often a box that says, like, aside from toxins and infections and all these other physical issues, physical causes of disease, there's chronic stress. And chronic stress often gets kind of lumped in as, it's a big factor, but we're not going to really talk about it today. You can use your other tools. It's like meditation, tell them to stretch, all those kind of things. And then through a lot of things I've been interested in and gone through my own life, realize, there's the emotions, subconscious emotions, belief systems are massive chronic stresses, massive blocks in health. And so that's what I feel so much, I feel so lucky right now and feel so like happy and joyful when working with people, because for the first time in my career, after like wondering, knowing it's important but not really knowing what to do with it or how to fold it all into one system, can in this process say, oh, now it's time to, your body's telling us that it's time to work with an old trauma, trauma related to head injury. She was in a car accident, her friend died when she was a senior in high school. So it's the physical trauma, but also the emotional traumas being
Are you familiar with EMDR? I'm sure you are.
Yeah.
Do you do it?
I don't. I've experienced it, and I feel EMDR.
That's why I was going to ask you your opinion about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I think.
What's it stand for?
Eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to go in all these directions tonight. That's great. So when I think about emotions and how they sit in the body, because your body remembers everything, whether it's your
right.
And when I say body, I mean mind also. That's, to me,
So
it's the same. It's the same thing. So I think of it like geology. You go through a freeway road cut, and there's all those different layers, and it gets placed in all those layers. And the deeper you go down, the less accessible it is, And so if you go to talk therapy and you have this aha moment, it might help those top layers, but then there are deeper layers and deeper layers. And EMDR does kind of get down to some deeper layers. And I had a really transformative experience with EMDR the one time I tried it. And I've seen it not be enough. And in the deepest layers, it goes beyond, I guess EMDR is also below words, it's below images, but sometimes really working with body sensations can get that deep. And the plants that I use seem to be able to kind of really get in there and help that like sludge. If you clean out a pipe and there's just a little that layer left that's really stubborn. I had a recent person I'm working with, and I haven't made a lot of headway with him recently either, but he had an EMDR session that created violent vomiting in him. And so there was something about that EMDR that he wasn't ready for.
Well, that's why I was asking. I've only read about it recently, and it was very interesting. I mean, I don't know how it's done. I mean, I haven't gone into depth about that, but I know that they use it with PTSD people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and it has been very successful.
Yeah, I think it is really helpful. And there are so many good things in the world, so many effective therapies and treatments. And the hard part for me, as I've been really curious and learning about all these different things, is when do you use them? Exactly. And who do you refer to? What do you learn to do yourself? What is somebody ready for? What are they not ready for? And that's the overwhelm that I've felt in my own clinical practice, and why, I guess, I've kept searching for some way of not just here's the therapy that's the best, but what's the system that I can use so that when you walk in, I have some process for deciding here's what you need. What's the priority? Because there's so many things. There's so many supplements out there. I mean, you just could drive yourself crazy trying to. So that was so Claudia. We went through that third appointment, and she was feeling much better. And then we kind of made a switch, which is the switch that makes me really happy, away from symptom management. Okay, well, you're feeling better, into quality of life, joy, purpose. And the priority that came up that fourth time was this more mental, spiritual, weeping fatigue inside of her that's just overwhelmed from trying to figure out what to do with her life. Her search, she really wanted a purpose, trying to figure out her career. She's 25, and it's just has this I want to be perfect I want to have the perfect practice, and it's just bringing her down. And so that time we also talked about astrology, which is something I've learned a lot about in the last 3 or 4 years and become kind of obsessed with, because it gives the language and the structure to a lot of these things. It's helpful. And so that's Claudia. It was like it was a nice arc of working with like concrete physical disease and moving through these different layers, kind of like that, with that road cut. And since she's 25, she responds pretty fast. Kids respond even faster, but and so kind of presenting that up as that's kind of the one way that I work right now, or the one way that the work that I do with people can go. I just thought we could talk more about that, like what does that model of health look like? How did I get to the point where I can have this sort of like intuitive communication with a person? And then what are the plants? That's kind of what those 3 things are: plants, river, and love. And the power of you part is she's in charge. She's not coming in and I'm not putting a label on her and saying, okay, here's my treatment for post-traumatic stress, Lyme disease, head injury.
Well, that's kind of where coaching comes in too, for us.
Yeah.
We're trying to pull out what they already know.
Right. Yeah, it's a good strategy to have, no matter what your tools are. So, any questions about that first? Probably many. I'll just say that, so I guess what I'll do is just say a little bit about, and try and be brief about how I got here, the story question. Because I guess for me, my brain works in bigger pictures. Like I really like theory. I like learning all these different ways of seeing the world, seeing our bodies, seeing our health, and then how do they match up? And also, that sort of respect for both the rational, linear thinking, and then also the
free spirit.
Yeah. I don't know. And I was really kind of entranced as I even as a teenager with these different ways of seeing the world. Whether it was, Jonathan Livingston Seagull was a big book for me that I wrote a paper on in high school, because it's I don't know if you all know that book.
Which book? Say it again.
Jonathan
Livingston Seagull.
Richard Bach.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about a bird.
It's about a bird, but it's about a bird who pushes through these limits of normal perception and kind of, what is this deeper truth?
Deep.
And then, just other ways of seeing the world. Got fascinated by books like Freetop Copra's The Web of Life, where that was the first time I ran into this idea that living systems, can have a consciousness, a non-linear system that has all these parts and they're all communicating and self-regulating and it can evolve, and that they're different. You can't just treat those like a car, where you can just identify, here's the part that's broken and you fix it. It has this unpredictability of, living things have this unpredictability to them. And then when I was teaching high school, I was really stressed, and my mom, who's oftentimes kind of come in and given me something or pushed me in a direction that really had a big impact, told me about a Heartmath Institute class that I was in Southern California, and this Heartmath Institute was just 45 minutes away. Have you all heard of it? Mm-hmm. It's a nonprofit that's been around for a long time, since the 70s.
It's just the clock. Do that for you.
Yeah. Looking at the heart and emotions and connecting emotions with the immune system and the brain and your thinking. And it was this really cool moment for me as a high school teacher teaching science, who's kind of stressed out, that there is a connection there, and there are specific steps that one can take to access your own intuition by kind of thinking about or experiencing emotions like joy and love. And because that's the other thing about me that my mom taught me, was that there are other ways of receiving information than just with your sight and with your smell, touch, with your rational brain thinking. She was kind of a pendulum user, which, they're kind of like yes, no, and...
Is it a boy or a girl?
Yeah. And then this Heartmath Institute taught the biological basis of intuition, saying that if you can center your heart rate variability with joy and love and relaxation, and it becomes coherent, then it quiets the autonomic nervous system in the brain, quiets the chatter, and allows this other kind of wisdom to come out. And so that was the first time I was like really practicing intuition and realizing that if I could do it, and sometimes you do it, sometimes you don't, you kind of like can get into the zone and then you fall out, then all of a sudden everything kind of flows in a lot smoother way, and you can make better decisions and your body works better. And so that was my first introduction to intuition in a practical way that has a science underlying, here's how it works background, plus this idea that increasing the amount of like love, joy in yourself can actually change the way you have relationships with other people. And they're teaching this to like Fortune 500 companies. They have this quick little 5-minute stress buster. They wouldn't talk about all that, airy-fairy stuff, but just like, hey, here's how you can really reduce your stress, make better decisions. They're teaching it to the military, all this stuff. And so that really sparked my interest in what I do now. I didn't know if I wanted to be a doctor, but I knew I wanted to learn more about that connection, more about how emotions and physiology works, and be able to kind of explain that to people. And so I ended up going to naturopathic school. After I tried to I inquired at a graduate school I was thinking like PhD in immunology or something, and I asked it was just kind of a funny thing. I called and asked a researcher who was working with stress and the immune system. I asked her if they ever talked about emotional effects on the immune system, and she got really quiet. And she said, "Oh, we don't talk about that kind of thing here." And this is 1997, I guess. I was like, okay. That was a worthwhile phone call. Now I know what I'm not going to do.
Yeah.
So then I went to naturopathic school, which ended up even being in my hometown, introduced to me by a friend of mine, and it was this great, it's like, here's this smorgasbord of like, oh, here's all the different ways that the conventional Western medicine ways that the human body works. And talk about homeopathy and energy medicine. I took a class where, kind of Reiki-ish, where practicing moving the body and feeling the body in different ways as an alternative to like adjustments was the first time I was like, oh, I can actually I can learn how to feel the energy of the body, which like I didn't have like an innate, we all have an innate intuitive capability. I don't have like ability to see auras or like feel, but one thing that my career has taught me is that you can learn a lot of those things. So learn that, and it was just this really kind of free, open place of curiosity, and everybody's doing different things, and the hardest part was, like we were talking about before, choosing, like, okay, what am I going to do? What's my method going to be? Which one's more effective? But did a lot of homeopathy, did a residency, is 4-year school, and then you kind of launch yourself into private practice, and which ended up being kind of a long road of trying different models. Like I took something called the body detox system and got really excited about it and learned all about this. It's a whole energy medicine system of kind of muscle testing and tapping on the head, and it was great. It seemed to work pretty well, but didn't work as well as I needed it to. So then that kind of sent me back to regular medicine. Okay, we need to bring that in more. Even prescribed pain meds for a little while to people, thinking, okay, I'm just gonna meet them halfway. here's what you need, or what you say you need. Turns out they were cheating me. I was right on the edge of that whole opioid scandal. It was kind of awful. But no fault of their own. It's just that it's the way the drugs do. The drugs do that to you. And then trying to help them with their pain with other methods besides just the drugs. I ended up at a Sufi workshop when I was having my own, kind of personal stress, like stuff I needed to work through. And that was the first place that really taught me this way of working with emotions, being in relationship to your emotions. That's just like pure, going back to the love part, like pure acceptance. Like if you feel fear and shame, allowing that fear and shame to be in your body rather than trying to breathe it away or drink it away or bring in light or tap it away, whatever. Just forget all those things we were taught in these classes. Just allow yourself to feel that pain, walk into that darkness. So that was a huge piece too that was like kind of brought in as I'm kind of spiraling around my career. And I still do that in my practice quite often with people. Have a half-hour phone session where, yes, we're doing these other things like we talked about with Claudia and the herbs, and we talk about astrology and these intuitive images. And in order for you to help the plants work with you, let's have a half hour on the phone where I, guide you through just feeling these emotions in your body. And because, as I learned later, and I'm still learning, your body knows what to do with those emotions as long as we get out of the way. Like your digestive system can actually digest and chew and decide what to keep if it's nourishing and what to let go that needs to be let go. So that piece was really good. And then I got into functional medicine. So there are all these pieces that I was trying to figure out, how do I combine them together? And again, as soon as Nathan, come in, where do I start? Do I work with your emotions? Do I, do we talk about your brain?
Let's
your
do it
gut, all that stuff. Like, yeah, a lot of naturopaths do it all. And you end up with this, it was actually my pet peeve. It's like, I didn't like going to naturopaths. I was one, I couldn't stand them. Because you go in and you just get vomited. Yeah, here's $200 worth of supplements, let's run these labs. And in the end, it's like, oh. And I even tried practicing like that for a while. I was just like, oh, it just is awful. So functional medicine, I thought, was the next thing I wanted to, was kind of diving back into the basic science of how the body works and getting really detailed into the thyroid and the gut and the immune system. And it was awesome, and I still use that information every day in talking to people about their bodies. And functional medicine requires an enormous outlay of expense and all these lab tests. There are some shortcuts, but I was working with autoimmune disease primarily, especially Hashimoto's thyroid, and got to be pretty well known in Portland and like really busy practice, and would help people, but it was still that position of like, I don't know. It's a guess. Like, I don't know what to do for you. I can come up with 10 different treatment plans that make sense because I have all this knowledge of how the body works. And well, we could start there because we could start here because that could affect we could work with your emotions, that'll affect. But it was an overwhelming feeling of like, you come in, ask me to kind of play God because you're giving me the power to decide what is the right thing to do. Or you're giving a lab the power to decide what the right thing to do is. And I tried that. Here's the $300 gut test or neurotransmitter test or all the other tests. And they come with these protocols and they say, you just do this and then it'll be great. And it's like, awesome. And we do that and sometimes it works and a lot of times it doesn't. Now I know because it wasn't a priority. Like, oh, your gut's off. But is your gut off because your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system is ramped, or is your gut off because you have parasites? Is your gut off? And there's a lot of different reasons. What's the priority?
You use that word a lot today.
I know, I like it. And I don't want to go too long. So that's where I was when the plants called me. I didn't know that at the time. This was like 3 years later that I knew. But I had this family situation. I always had this desire to kind of move to the East Coast. I was in Oregon. I grew up in Oregon. And because of a kind of a family camp situation in New Hampshire on Squam Lake, which is a place we love, all of a sudden we had this sort of epiphany like, oh, like we should just move. We should just move with our 3 little kids away from my family, across the country, and we ended up in Vermont for various reasons and sheltering. And right about that same time, I had found out about this thing called intuitive bioresonance, bioresonance analysis of health. So an MD, European MD, who worked in New York, and he was a functional medicine practitioner, but he's European, so he had all these crazy treatments, different injection treatments, and ozone, plus normal diet stuff and supplements. And what they were promising in this basically spam email I got was a way of identifying when somebody comes in with complex disease and who's a complex person, like what is the priority, and being able to access your intelligence, like your body's wisdom, through this process that had like an antenna, and I would get a blood sample. And it was like, there are a lot of things out there. I've investigated lots of different machines and techniques, and but I was at the point where I just wanted to give it a shot and see if it worked. So that coincided with the move east, and it ended up being a really great tool for me because it, number one, it worked, which I was really surprised about. Like this French-made antenna that's basically like a yes-no, pendulum kind of thing. But it seemed to reach like a deeper place in people's bodies than just like the normal medicine muscle testing that I've done before. Really could kind of go through this system and come up with a priority, like here's the first thing to do, and then like 3 or 4 weeks later, let's try another sample, and things shift. Oh, here's the new plan, and things shift, and all of a sudden I didn't have to like worry when somebody came in, like, oh God, I don't know whether to keep them on this supplement or not. Is it helping? No. Maybe it'll start working now. That had more of a concrete process for saying, okay, here's what you're going to take for this long, this dose, then stop it, then move on. And so the really amazing part about that was one, that it was like really helping people at a level that I hadn't before, and I could use all this other knowledge that I already had and bring it in to the choices. Here's my toolbox. Essentially, is the way I was thinking of it. Like, here's my toolbox. Here's this like buffet of different options, and then I could just ask you through this process, well, which one matches? Like, which one resonates with you the most? And the European MD had his whole crazy practice that you go to his clinic and it costs you like $30,000 over like 5 weeks, and he gets great results, and there's incredibly sick people. But that's not what ended up happening to me, because it's running through, the other great part about this technique is it's running through me. I'm processing the information. I'm part of the circuit between your blood, the antenna, my toolbox. All that information is kind of getting packaged into one and then coming out. And so what that meant is I did this over and over and over again, was that I was suddenly learning much more about health and disease than I'd ever, in a much more rapid and deep fashion than I ever had before. Like, for example, we were always taught as naturopaths, start with the gut. If you have a digestive issue, for sure. If you have allergies, yes. If you have there's brain-gut axis, you start with the gut. So I'd always done that. And then what this process taught me was that you can't work with the gut until the nervous system is healthy. It was like, oh yeah, of course, I know that from functional medicine. Like the leaky gut, like if you have stress signals coming from your brain at a significant level, it literally causes the gut membrane to fall apart. And so how does it make sense to try and repair the leaky gut when somebody has this like, stress mechanisms, whether it's from like a head injury or this other thing. So that totally changed the way that I treat gut things. For instance, now when I work with somebody, I can tell them like, we're going to probably do these other things, and then eventually in 3 or 4 months, we'll actually focus on your gut. And it works so much better. I also learned that flow is the most critical part of health and recovery from disease. In our culture, we don't do a lot. Like something as simple as bitters, that help digestive flow and this downward cold energy flow that bitters have. We don't do the Scandinavian, hot, cold stimulation of flow, that some people do lymph brushing. We have a terrible relationship with our emotions, so we're creating stagnancy there because, what I was saying about that Sufi technique I learned, most people don't do. That's not how I was taught to deal with emotions. Like and you're not taught by all the like cute signs that people say on their walls, like just smile, or today's a beautiful day. It's like anytime there's darkness in our culture, anytime we're taught to turn away from it, because you don't want to think negatively. You're going to create, but you're already creating it. But it's negative stuff. So flow, over and over and over again for the last 8 years, the first thing that happens with somebody when I check in with their body and say, okay, what's the priority, has something to do with flow. And it could be a detox, like you're just stagnant and stuck in your liver and lymph, and that needs to flow. It could be emotional flow, like a stuckness and fear, or it could be just general lymph, or a lot of head injury stuff. A lot of times people come, not head injuries, but like depression, anxiety. When you sleep, the brain has to take the garbage out. Cerebral spinal fluid has to flow through the cribriform plate in your nose and down through your neck and into your lymph, and then out your excretory organs. And so often that's not happening. And so, and this is actually something that's now recognized a lot more in like Alzheimer's research and Parkinson's research. And they thought, oh, these plaques are causing Alzheimer's. And well, it turns out that those plaques are a byproduct of poor cerebral spinal, flow coming out of the brain. The brain isn't able to take its trash out, so it builds up. So it's not the plaques causing Alzheimer's; it's the lack of trash being taken out. And so that's with the cells too. Every one of your cells has to take its own garbage out, and it goes into this netting in between the cells, and then that gets squeezed like a sponge into the lymph and then flows out. So that was a huge part, and then other pieces like being able to work with emotions or like belief systems about maybe not being well, or a belief system of something else. And that's where the flow part came in, and the river. So as I was doing this more and more, and I was like, God, people are really getting a lot better, and we're not really doing that much. Like, what's happening here? And I realized what we're really trying to, what I was helping them do was unblock their own physiologic flow. And so that's that term. I just use physiologic flow. Everything, hormones, electrical signals, emotional flow, and we all have like a connection to something bigger than ourselves that is also a big part of that flow. And if you can just get things moving, then a lot of those problems will be ironed out. Or at least like a big, like layer of grime gets ironed out, and then you can see more clearly where there's a specific spot that needs to be addressed. I forgot I had this. So on my website, I have this book that I made a few years ago. It's on the homepage. I just printed one out. I thought I had laminated cards before, but this is a description of this kind of like overall approach, which says, okay, we have 5 or many different layers of our physiology, everything from like really concrete, organ-based to like nervous system, endocrine, and then there's an energetic flow, electromagnetic flow, and chakras and all that. And if all of that works well together, it's very self-healing. And I started to use the analogy of a river. And I still do, and it's been really, really helpful both to me and to my clients. Because a healthy river has really good flow, it's got good organisms around it, it supports life. If you dump like oil into this, it'll clean itself out. But if, like many rivers in our country, get too stagnant, whether it's natural pollution, synthetic pollution, some kind of block, this is meant to be like a canal, you're not allowed to find its own rhythm, then you get sick. When somebody comes in, instead we start at the top, the priority word, the big P, and look and say, what is the first thing you need to do? And the cool part about it is that once that gets unblocked, your own physiologic self-healing flow improves, and some of the things that are in your river will be taken care of yourself. I've had a lot of people who have, just using the gut disease example again, gut problems that we never actually talk about, but they just go away. Because once you got the other systems in line, the gut was able to just kind of heal itself. So, any questions about that stuff? Or any double clicks?
I have a double click.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the evolution you've had between your intuition and that power shift to your client, and how you just fascinated with that interplay of I can imagine a scenario where the intuition is the power, right? This is what I think, and therefore this is what we'll do. And it sounds like you've had a really amazing journey into developing that intuition as a tool to help cultivate the power of your client. Can you talk about that evolution and where you've settled? Yeah,
because I knew I always wanted to use intuition clinically. That was always the solution, the obvious solution. It was obvious in my own life because I'm not very good at pro-con lists, or whenever I tried to say okay, I'm planning on doing this makes sense. It didn't really work out. The only thing that really worked out in my own life was things that just happened, or this just feels right. So that made sense to me. And so then, and also we got some feedback in medical school, which is nice. There was actually a Chinese medicine practitioner who was big on no, you need to figure out a way to use your own intuition in clinical practice, because like I said before, there are always things that are going to make sense. And you can use intuition to find that kind of priority. That was the early idea. And you're right, I really love that question, because I never thought of it that way. That at that time, it was just using intuition as another tool as the doctor in power. And it never really occurred to me in that way. In saying, oh yeah, here's what we're going to do, here's what I'm going to give you. And that's going to go in and do what it needs to do. And through the bioresonance process, number one, that sort of aha moment I had of there's the healing capability that you have within you that is so much more powerful than anything I can give you. And that what I can do best, or what seems to be working best, because it wasn't some aha that I learned in a class and came in and did it. It was just this is weird. Why? What's happening? And then I go back to my own intuition and ask that question, and keep going. And it's like, oh, here's what's happening. You're essentially selecting the things you need to kind of unblock, and then your own kind of power takes over. And there are times when you need to ask for help. This is a big. I think we all have a lot of healing capability within us, but I also none of us is like, I don't know, enlightened or super powerful or whatever to just be able to like magically make things go away. We need to ask for help, and whether that's I've been meaning to go see Melissa for the last 8 months, and now I know it's what I need to do, because all the other things have gotten in place where Melissa's work will have that impact. And then the really profound part, though, was the plants part. I teased you a little bit, and then I forgot about it and left it there. As I did this more and more, I had this huge toolbox of things that I've learned. Ways, supplements, flower essences, homeopathic remedies, European biosalts, exercises, meditation, all that stuff. And again, giving you the control, just kind of could sit back and watch how that evolved over time. And what happened over time was that plants started coming in more and more strongly into the support plans, I call it now. Because, by the way, when I moved remote and quit my office, and only do this now, and I don't do any primary care medicine, because in Vermont I'm a primary care physician, I had to stop all medical terminology. So that's why I say client, that's why I say support plan, because this bioresonance process that I do is not diagnostic, it's not prescriptive, because, again, like we're talking about, it's coming from you. And I even changed my URL on my website. Like this says Dr. Travis Elliott on it, which I'm realizing I should probably replace since I'm having people download. And now it just says Travis J. Elliott, Intuitive Health Consulting. Plants started coming more. And I was using more and more custom tinctures from a place called Lecher Apothecary in Burlington. And I have an herbal background. I'm not an herbalist, but it's part of our naturopathic training, and I've used them on and off, but I'd kind of gone to just using capsules and formulas. But more and more, I was using custom tinctures. And I'm using this yes-no kind of intuitive process to choose the plants for the tinctures. They're actually helping facilitate your choice of 3 or 4 plants. I call rail yard to put them together, and you take them. And it was helpful, but I was still using some other things, and we weren't going as like deeply as I felt like we needed to. People weren't getting change in their bodies and their psyches and their emotions, and in their symptoms that I felt like there was more. I didn't know why, but I just kept going along and trusting that the process would evolve. And then I learned. Are you signaling me?
No, sorry. Okay.
Then I learned about something called Spagyric plants, and it's Spagyric. And I'll write this website down because it's a really nice website. I use all their stuff now. It's called Natura Sophia. And if you're curious, you can go to naturasophia.com, or maybe it's naturasophiaspagyrics.com. And they have a beautiful new website. And so it's a husband and wife in Northwest Washington. And so I learned about these Spagyric plants. And I known about Spagyrics, different preparations, and I actually used them. I don't want to go too much into detail about that, but the Spagyric process is like an alchemical one. It's it's similar to like biodynamic farming or the whole Waldorf anthroposophical. It's like it's respecting the like consciousness of whatever substance you're working with. If you're working with a plant, you're acknowledging, the process inherently acknowledges that there's a body, soul, and spirit to that plant. And in their language, the soul and the spirit don't necessarily mean the same things that it might mean to you, but but there is a dense like body, earth, and then kind of a soul part in it, and which corresponds to like the essential oils of the plant, and then the spirit, and the spirit in their theory is more like the communicative element between this higher kind of wisdom and the body. And so it's very esoteric, it's ancient. Paracelsus created this Spagyric process in the 1500s. It's used in Europe a lot. I had used some combo formulas, like here's the liver formula, here's the lung formula. And I learned those from this European MD who I learned the Bioresonance process from. And they worked really well. And that was part of my, this is a cool process. But then I started using individual plants and realized there's something that I can give somebody by using a specific plant or in combination with 2 or 3 that really more closely resonates and matches with them. And then I found out that this company in Northwest Washington makes specific single tinctures and what they call essences, which are even more potent. It takes like 4 months to make one little vial. So liquid preparations of single herbs. Over 100 different tinctures, like 40 different of these essences. And just like I've done, dozens of times in my career, it's like, all right, that sounds cool. That has a lot of potential. Maybe I'll try it. So I ordered a few, tried them, and then waited to see, threw them in the toolbox, my metaphorical toolbox, and waited to see if they kind of bubble up in these support plants. And steadily, since 2019, there was I started using them more and more. I noticed in myself, and I noticed in my clients, that something was different. There was a different, it kind of gives me chills even talking about it, there was a greater depth of change. And one of the ways they talk about Spagyric plants is that you take the plant through the normal process of life, death, and rebirth. By picking it at a point when it's most blooming and alive, and the planets are in the right place, and it's wild crafted with the right intention, and then you separate it in this process that honors both the soul, spirit, and body of the plant, and then that's like this death process. And then you recombine it. And one of the things they do, just as a real tangible part, is the mush from a plant tincture. You put a plant in alcohol, and then it sits there for a while, and then the constituents come out in the alcohol water, and then you throw out the plant. What they do, that's the body. So they actually fire it, put it in a kiln or an oven. I just recently did this myself. Put it in my barbecue for 10 hours. And turns into this ash, like gray ash. It's like the salts of the plant, the bones of the plant. And they put that in the tincture. And just that itself sinks the plant's efficacy, its helpfulness, deeper in your body. So there was this difference. There was a change, and all of a sudden, this is where I've always wanted to be. These are the interactions I'm having with people, because when I do the intuitive process, what comes up is what's ready to be changed. If there's something that either the person isn't really ready for, or the body isn't ready for, or I don't have the tools for, we don't have any capability. This is not some all-powerful, all-seeing process. There's a system that has components. But all of a sudden those images, the things that were come up, were so much deeper and richer and more meaningful. And darker. I mean, that's, and darker in a good way. Like being able to take people through parts of themselves, reintroduce them to parts of themselves, release parts of themselves that had been dragging on for a really long time, that were getting stuck in their nervous system or stuck in their gut or working with Lyme. Realizing that the core of my work with Lyme is that it's not that you got bit by a tick, it's that you're not able to, that you're allowing Lyme disease to set up camp in your body and flourish. Lots of people get bit by ticks and don't get Lyme disease. So there's something about the immune system that isn't strong enough or capable enough to deal with. It's not 100%, that's generalization, but I think that is pretty true. And these, working with these plants and working with people with Lyme, realizing that, and the immune system gets trained on self versus non-self, danger versus not danger. And so if you at your core don't have a good sense of self, or you at your core don't have a feeling of safety, then that trickles up into the subtle functions of your immune system. And that, for example, is like one of the ways that you take functional medicine and then all the way these physical biochemistry pieces work, but what's the underlying patterns that's determining how those systems work? If that makes sense. Is this a long-winded answer enough for you?
Yeah.
So I realized, back to the power, that I had even less power than I thought I had when I was working with these plants. And I don't remember what the aha moment was, but all of a sudden realizing that, these plants are part of the process too. They're not just like some passive tool that I'm using, but that it's not just, Nathan, you and me working together, but it's you, me, and the plants. And that what comes up, like what you're able to show me as the priority, has as much to do with my ability to conceive it as like this sort of negotiation between you and the plants, subconsciously, like, okay, here's something that they can help you with, or hey, Nathan, here's something I can help you with. I mean, kind of anthropomorphic here, but this is how things work in my head. And that I then am the guide or an interpreter or the reflector back, and I'm like a mediator between you and I just keep saying the plants, which gets back to my whole sort of expanded view of health too, because the whole reason this intuitive process works is that we're not separate people. We have a perception of that we're all separate, but we're all connected. That's something we probably all believe. But it's and when I conceive of like, how is it possible that I can focus on this person and somehow communicate with them and get this sort of image up that is very, that is from them. And it took me a while to trust it and believe it and be, it's a whole other conversation, but it's from them. And it's because able to kind of like connect through our commonality, whether you think of it like an ocean of electromagnetic information or however you want to think about it, or quantum entanglements. Yeah, I mean, we have a perception that we're in like a Newtonian mechanical world, but now we know that it's the quantum physics that really describes our world, and quantum physics is counterintuitive and confusing, and like, wait, how's that happening? So that's been really humbling for me, and it's been awesome because it's changed my relationship with my clients, but also my environment. so what I was saying is that like health is not just you, but it's every relationship that you have. And that includes your natural environment, you know, other people in your life. But I mean, you know that more than I love working with farmers because you all get it, like on a really tangible level, like how deeply interconnected all those things are. And that, and love part, as I was writing down my whole story, Rixie, after you asked me the question, I decided not to bore you with the whole thing, but I'm trying to give you highlights. But I realized that I love what I'm doing, and I also like feel that connection now, like between not just like me and the client, me and you, but me and all the different parts of you, and all these different plants, and the rest of the world that we live in, especially in Vermont, and here. And that feels like love. I mean, that is love. That deep, like, interrelatedness. And when I said that the plants sort of called me back from Oregon, it was like, once I moved to Vermont, and I really felt like was more integrated into the natural environment being here than other places, especially in downtown Portland, Oregon. And then I moved my practice off of, before I moved my practice in the woods and remote, we moved, you know, from a Shelburne suburb to, the woods. And it didn't really make sense to me, you know, again, I'm this intuitive, like, okay, this feels like the right thing, it's too expensive, but we just need to do it, and then I had this thought, like, oh, it's good for my practice, in some way that I don't even understand yet. And then I had an experience, this is definitely a tangent, hopefully you're okay with that. Sitting, looking at this grassy field, as the sun went down, it was like all of a sudden the light, like, I can find a picture for you if you want, but like an explosion of light through these like grass seed heads. And I had this like deep realization that the plants were bringing me along, you know, that I wasn't on this journey alone. And that was when, that was right when I learned about the Spagyric plants and had just started to use them. And then, so it went from that kind of realization to now seeing it kind of clinically. Oh, this is what it feels like to just give up all that control in my practice. This is what I did at that point. It's like, okay, I don't have to figure out what's next. I don't have to figure out what to do. Like, this natural world is going to lead me there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Definitely.
I don't remember what his question was.
His question was, no, but I think it was, I just want to frame it because your question was, how did the intuition change through my first using it in terms of the power dynamic? Yeah. And so that's what it did. Like my intuition led me to a point where I gave up that power and I feel pretty happy about it.
Thank you for the full answer.
Well, that's why we're here, right?
That's why we're here. That's why I'm here.
I meant to tell you, Melissa, like if I'm just like giving too long an answer, we needed a hand signal. Because that's my tendency. That's my tendency. Okay. Functional medicine, how do you practice now? Where do you see medicine going? I think you also asked where do you see medicine, like society, going?
Yeah, I did.
Melissa was kind to me and didn't write that part of your question down.
We all have opinions.
We all have opinions.
Story was slow.
Can't go there.
Okay. What do you,
Can you talk about, like, specifically, like, I know because I work with you, but if someone wanted to have a session with you or work with you or consult with you, like, how exactly does it work?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Here, I'll pass these around. This is something, we talked about the river. I'm just going to put these out here in case, but I'm going to answer Melissa's question. And then this one, there are 4 of them that are, it's a blog post that I wrote when I moved away from blood samples, because I didn't say that. So that's a good transition. So as I was running these bioresonance tests over and over and over and over again, just like I learned how to feel the electromagnetic energy of a body, it's like, oh, my intuition is getting trained. I'm getting better and better at this. Instead of just checking off boxes, I can actually see, like, get a felt sense of what's happening in the body. And then these images started coming up. And so I all of a sudden realized, oh, this image is not just for me, this is coming from you, the patient. And that this is the priority. So I changed my reports and put that image front and center. So we'll talk about like how to, the membership part and how to make an appointment. But when somebody comes in to see me, the first thing I do now, I even do it before we meet. You know, I get a picture, fill out a form, is do what I call intuitive bioresonance analysis, you know, which is, I felt like I learned an acronym and I just created a new acronym. I don't know, intuitive reading, sometimes people call them, whatever it is. I will sit down, focus and connect with you, and wait for an image to come up. And that image, as I do it longer, you know, hundreds and thousands of times, it becomes a little richer. Sometimes I can explore it a little bit. Sometimes they'll say, okay, well, here's the priority. Here's where there's the stuckness. Like this person here. I didn't give you the handout, but for her, it was... and I write it like this. Like, you're showing me an image that represents the overall flow of your body and mind. It looks and feels like a bunch of sharp-pointed triangles bumping into each other and jostling for space. Each of these triangles represents some system of your body, or your mind, or your spiritual practice or lifestyle that is within itself intrinsically healthy and flowing, but just feels like the integration or lack thereof of all these triangular systems. And I called them triangular systems because like literally just what they look like in my mind's eye. Is creating stress, discord, and inflammation. And then as I did this longer, I started being able to like ask, okay, well, how might this change? Like I can imagine like what would, like maybe they should all just fuse together in a big circle, I don't know. But I could then ask like, okay, how does this change with the right support? And so the triangles soften and come together in a kind of many-sided pyramid made of all of what currently feels separate. And as they come together and flow through the boundaries, the sharpness disappears and the flow takes on a more circular or spherical shape that is extremely dynamic. And then I go through different parts of the report and ask about like physical systems. For her, it wasn't a specific system, it was the relaxation of all of the tissues of all of the regulatory systems, which I consider like nervous system, detox, endocrine, musculoskeletal, and then there's a couple other things to report, and then a support plan, which at this point is 98% of the time these Spagyric herbs, because they've kind of kicked everything else out and said, we got this. Which is nice, because and I also ended up, after using them more and more, I bought the inventory. Instead of sending you to order from this place in Northwest Washington and it takes 2 weeks and it's like slows everything down, I now have them in my office so I can mix custom formulas. And so at this point I would do that and I would create a report, but I wouldn't send it to you yet. And then we would meet and find out about your story. You can ask me questions, get a real clear baseline of where you feel stuck. And then we step out of the meeting, and it's all video, I should have said Zoom or Google Meet. And I go back to that intuitive process and just kind of check in one more time and see, okay, now that I've met you, is there anything that I want to change? More and more, there isn't anything that I want to change. I just step out for 5 minutes, make sure everything's dialed in, and then share that with you via Google Docs. I can email, click this link, here's your folder, it's a PDF. I was going to bring one. I forgot. And then we talk about it. We go through the report. And the cool thing, the thing that's been really affirmative to me is, triangles. Right? That's weird. Why am I writing about triangles? But then when I describe that to her, she says, and this is what usually happens, like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, she has that felt sense of triangles bumping together that I don't. So when I'm writing it down, it seems kind of weird. But for her reading it, it resonated, I guess. And then 3 weeks after the person, like Claudia, takes the herbs, and you kind of have to estimate, sometimes the herbs end earlier, sometimes they last longer, the herbs are going to go in, your body's going to respond to them. And even if you end them early, you're still working with them. The flow of your river of health is changing, and it's a good time, 3-4 weeks later, you email me and say, I'm ready for the next one. And at that point, I do a second IBA and get a clear sense of like, okay, here's where we were last time, here's where we are this time. Sometimes it's really close, like it's obvious that it's like a second step of the same process. Other times it's something totally different. And then I send that to you ahead of time. Now you're an established client, you get it, you read it, and then we, within a day or two, we have another video appointment, find out how you've been doing, we go over the report. I haven't talked about astrology at all, but I've been using it more and more. Sometimes it shows up on the report. Sometimes we just talk about it in the consult. And the consult is really helpful because it's still intuitive. It's becoming more and more an intuitive process at that time too. Like, here's the report. I then hear about your response to it. I hear what's going on with you. Other questions come up. We talk about different systems of the body, emotions, whatever, and it can be it all kind of flows together, I guess. And so the membership, the way I set it up now is it's a different process. I don't know anybody else who does this. I just kind of evolved into it over time. So it's understandable, and there are a lot of things out there that sound good. But so I want to have a really low bar of entry. So it's free for the whole first appointment, except for the cost of the herbs. You sign up directly through my website and put in your credit card, but it's not charged for 3 weeks. And in that time, we've had our first consult, and then you can decide whether to keep going. And this is took me a while to figure out a system, but I've tried other systems. But I like this now because it also allows you to pause it and restart it anytime. It's not, you're not locked in for like a year or anything. It's just, and people pause because they're, for finances, some people pause because they travel, some people just feel like, okay, I'm good now, and I'll come back in 6 months or whatever. There's a lot of different ways. And there's not really any, I think within 4, 7, you really, I think you can expect, or anybody who comes in can expect to really feel significant change, in those first few months. But, there's some people I've worked with for years and years now because they just love the process and it helps them feel more joy in their life, And because I'm not in charge anymore, I can feel good about you're still getting a benefit because this is just the process is just really working with you and the plants and astrology now, which really helps people. I can help ground people in kind of overall cycles of their life. This is happening, and here's some reasons why this might be happening now instead of before, and that part's really kind of exciting to me. Is that what you were thinking, Melissa?
Perfect.
Anything I left out?
I don't think so. We're sort of at the question and answer point.
Yeah.
If anyone has any specific questions.
So your primary intervention is using the herbals?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, herbs, also really just like any kind of awareness, like here's what's happening. Like I can still use my functional medicine doctor mind, which I really enjoy using, but I can use it to kind of tell stories about what's happening in the body instead of being under the gun trying to figure out what's wrong. And so even just talking about it and saying, here's why this is happening, here's the connection, and becoming aware of it, and this diet that you tried before, sometimes people ask me about that, and I say, I don't give dietary advice anymore, and I'm just giving you these herbs, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing you need. But the really cool part, and I haven't mentioned this in a lot that I remember, is the power is your own intuition. And that was the thing that blew me away in the first few years of doing this, was it was connecting you to your self-healing power, but it was also connecting you to yourself. And what happened when people got more connected to themselves and all that kind of grime, and whether it's belief system grime or Lyme grime or toxins or better gut health, nervous system calms down, their own intuition got stronger.
So with the herbs, that is helping the intuition and people get more in touch, okay.
And people make dietary changes now on their own. Like I just talked to a woman last week who thousands of times she tried to quit sugar. Awful addiction to sugar, tied up with all these different pieces. And just last week she had this massive shift in her psyche, as she called it. And she's like, I just stopped eating sugar and it was easy. Or going to see Melissa, all those processes, as you get strong, your own intuition, your own
that leads
core
you
self.
to other places.
Yeah. And a book falls off the shelf when you're in a bookstore. Or, I want people to pull those things in for themselves and not use me as the only thing they need, because it's not. It's just connecting you to your own self. So thank you for that question. I forgot about that.
The guided meditation that we've done also, I would say, was for me a crystallizing moment of connecting with Travis helping me, not just through the herbs, but also through this guided meditation of feeling the sensations in my body. I can feel this, and then it leads me to intuitions that I didn't know I wasn't clear on, or wasn't confident enough, or didn't feel powerful enough, or whatever, to go in that direction. So just having that assistance, I've tried meditating 1,000,000 times, right? Okay. But never having the assistance and the support in those moments was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Because I was going to say that too. The herbs are part of the support plan, the regular motion or regular rhythm. And then as part of the membership, right now it's worded 3 phone sessions, in a year. And those 30-minute phone sessions could be, I wrote down it could be a more astrological consult, but they were originally intended and still get used most of the time for these, guided mindfulness. And that's that part that I mentioned with the Sufis, helping you connect more deeply to your own emotions and your own
kind of opening up that portal, so to speak.
And helping you digest.
Yeah.
There are places when we're kids and we grow up and we're being little scientists and trying to figure out how the world works, things happen, and it's not always just kids, obviously, but things happen often when we're kids and it doesn't feel very good. And it gets stuck in there.
Yeah.
And we then fashion our entire lives and our identity with a strategy to not feel that. And it sits there. And so that's often the kind of thing that this guided mindfulness, that thing will roil and boil, and it can then create stress and inflammation and tension in the body. So then we're working on all these things with the herbs, and the herbs can help create some space there, can help your body digest those things. And other times you just kind of get this sense and talking to people, and like, yeah, we can also use your mind to help you digest those. But it's not about making it go away. Like I said before, it's about focusing your heart and your attention on it and just feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just do that, then it'll digest it.
So when you say digest, you're saying, is that release?
Yeah, well, I mean, I use that word very deliberately, because like when you eat food, you have to chew it, but once it goes down in your gut, you're not in control anymore. Your intestines, they know what to do, and what they break it apart and sort it. And this is a very Virgo thing. Virgo has to do with the intestines, and decide ideally if everything's working well, what's nourishing, like I said before, and is invited into the body to become part of the growing, evolving you, and what needs to just be let out through the large intestine.
I really like the digest part.
And that's
I've
like,
heard of, release and all that, but I've never heard digest, so I like it.
because it's not, like if you just released, it's like if you just chewed food and then, I'm going to release it. It's like, well, then you need, like, that motion is useful. Like, that was something, an experience that happened to you. And if you have enough respect for it, like, and that's, I have a handout that, it's treating your emotions with respect. Like, if you, like a child who's having a bad day, and instead of like, here's a lollipop, you just hold that child and just allow it to like process, do her own thing. It's the same thing, like just allow it to be there and integrate with you.
Yeah.
Then
And
you will
accept,
separate it.
and accepting and
Allow
not
it.
resisting everything in life,
Mhm.
just allowing and accepting things.
And the chewing process is the tension, like that's the attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then your body will then digest. And there's certainly awful, terrible experiences that you don't need anymore. That memory can just,
Mm-hmm.
and there may be a little piece of that trauma that is nourishing. And your intestines know the difference if you give them a chance. But the core of the herbs, and then I always wonder, Racy, like when to bring in the guided mindfulness, when not to. Maybe I'll start using it more. But it's definitely a powerful additional step.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head with me. You like heard that I was, I don't know, I felt like you heard that I was not able to.
Mm-hmm.
I was feeling something, but trying to justify I got to get over it kind of thing. And you were like, well, let's just stop what we're talking about right now and do 5 minutes of this.
Right,
And
I forgot that we did it just right then.
Yeah.
Instead of another appointment.
Yeah, no, we just said, can we use our time that way? I was like, okay, let's try
Yeah,
that.
and I guess that's part of, I guess I'll get better at that, then where the consult becomes more intuitive too, like, okay, what should we talk about right now? Rather than just going through like, blah, 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 here's what I do every time. And and this is a great example of like how much trust and, love I have for, you and everybody else I work with, of like being able to even be open to this process, because be a witness to, your process. That's an honor. So thank you. And since I'm not using the blood samples anymore, it used to be people were mailing blood samples to me on these little microscope slides. And then I got to the point over the last couple of years where it's like, I don't think I need this anymore. I'm doing testing with and without the sample to see if I came up with the same information. And so it was just 6 months ago or so when I wrote that blog and said, it's just more purely intuitive, which then makes the whole process easier. You can work with anybody, anywhere in the country.
Or the world, really?
The world, I have thought about that. It could be, you can't. I had a client who moved to the Czech Republic for like 3 months, and she spent like $90 for me to try and send her herbs through UPS, and
For the herbs, right?
they never
Shipping
got
gets,
there.
yeah.
They never
shipping
got there.
gets
They got-
challenging, yeah.
They
I was
got
thinking
kicked
that-
off at the border, and they disappeared. And,
Yeah, the consults would still work, but not the herbs,
So
yeah.
I'm sure that there's work that we could do, and if there was somebody, I'm sure I could figure something out.
Yeah.
And there are some people who say like, as soon as you tell me what the plants are, I can feel them working. Well, so there's that too.